The Millennium Development Goal of education for all is a bold one, and it's one that we should be able to reach, but it's one that we're not on track to reach at the moment. So it's going to take a real leap from where we are now, which is some countries in sub-Saharan Africa having less than a quarter of students in secondary school and less than half in primary education, to get to universal basic education. What it's going to take is the kind of political commitment in the richest countries in the world that Results is so good at creating. The reason I started to work on issues of education was because it became clear to me that our prevention efforts on HIV/AIDS were failing. And the more I learned about the impact of education on giving kids a chance to live, essentially, not just a chance to learn, but a chance to live, the more I realized that that our efforts around AIDS needed to include a really serious effort around not only eliminating school fees, but getting all kids in school. Because without that, we're never going to defeat this pandemic. Young girls are the group at greatest risk to HIV and AIDS. In fact, girls in their late teenage and early 20s have infection rates, 5, even 6 times those of their peers among boys. And there are a number of reasons for this. But one of the big reasons is because girls don't have the same kind of opportunities boys have. And in fact, in a situation where you've got school fees being charged, the boys are going to get to go to school and the girls aren't. If you look at the data from Uganda, for example, girls who make it through secondary education have just 1/4 of the chance of contracting AIDS as girls who don't have formal education. And that same data plays out in other countries as well. Zambia, for example, educated women have half the chance of being infected as uneducated women. The other reason why it's important is because of the orphans who are left behind, and the reality that those orphans will never have a chance to go to school if school fees remain in place in sub-Saharan Africa. There have been a number of successes in school fee elimination. Uganda, using money that it got from debt relief, was a pioneer in this in the late 1990s. Tanzania in 2000, and in the last couple of years, Kenya has moved forward. In each of those countries, what we've seen is enormous increase in enrollment. In fact, a doubling in Tanzania, over 1 million new kids in Kenya. And the reason why it's worked in those countries is because they were committed to getting that money to the school level. In fact, what they have is school bank accounts and local school governance committees that play a role in deciding how funds get spent. So these countries, by moving forward, have shown that school fee elimination can be extremely successful. Grassroots action has been at the center of the response to the crisis of orphans and vulnerable children. It was literally not on the radar screen when the AIDS Initiative was announced. What happened, though, was local activists got the attention of people like Senator Lugar in Indiana and others, convincing him to introduce legislation on this. So that legislation is now passed. So we've got comprehensive orphan legislation that's passed. We've got a clear earmark, about 10% of funding should go to orphans. The reason that's happened is because of local activists getting in touch with their member of Congress and telling them that this is such an important issue.
Because it's the individuals who have the capacity to unleash and to make a difference for themselves. I mean, when I left, I worked in villages, I worked with chiefdoms, I worked with traditional authorities, and intelligence is randomly distributed. People know what they want for their own context. Often they just lack knowledge and resources. From all the work that I've done in any country, particularly in Tanzania, you find that children were actually leaving school because of inability to pay fees, not just the fees, but the costs of education. The discussion is not about fees. The discussion is about the costs of education, because tuition fees are usually a minimal part of the total costs. What happens is, in addition to fees, parents are asked to pay for building instruction, for exercise books, for chalk, for all kinds of things. And when you tally all of these vis-a-vis household income, it really is too burdensome for parents. It was dramatic. After we had discussed the whole issue for about 6-9 months, and people knew that this was coming along, and they knew the capitation grants were there, and they knew that the transfer was going to be into school bank accounts. They were going to manage it. They would be guided to do school plans so that they have proper pedagogical plans for their schools. They were provided designs to have good structures when they build their classrooms. It was just enormous. I think in the first year you had an additional 1 million children going into school.
And was it exciting to be there?
It was absolutely fascinating. It was absolutely wonderful. It can easily be replicated. Replicated in the form of principles, not in the form of the same institutions. It's a question of how do we run a proper education system. Tanzania had no functioning education system in 2000, but it was put in place. That's what we should be working on. But I think that every government wants to do it, and everybody should do it, and the international community, including the bank, can help develop the systems that make it work. It's not rocket science. It can happen.
When the United States launched its effort to abolish school fees and establish free education here, which happened over 150 years ago, it was unprecedented. It was bold. It was scary. We've seen it work. We've seen it work so well, in fact, that universal free education is taken for granted as a basic right here in the United States. It's been central to our economic growth as a nation. It's been central to the growth of our democracy. 150 years after it was a bold and scary thing, we now have evidence that it works as well in some of the poorest nations on earth. In those nations like Kenya, like Tanzania, like Uganda, that have been bold enough to eliminate school fees. And the challenge we face is to turn the idea of universal basic education and free education, a quintessentially American idea, into something that is truly universal. I think we can do it, and I know that the work of results activists around the country will make that moment come even quicker.